Hold up.
Alright guys, before we actually dive into today's video, I want to give you a rundown on what I've been doing the past week with the suspension and with the steering on this thing. Now, in previous videos, I stated that I knew that the steering was kind of going to be a little bit of a nightmare on this thing, and boy is it. But I've learned a lot of things this past week, and it kind of solidified a couple theories that I had that I was going to have to do anyways. So let me just give you a little bit of a rundown. This is a 1-inch solid bar, solid stock, that I've turned down on the lathe, and there will be a jam nut here and a jam nut there, of course. This here is a factory piece that came off the Terra jet. This is a factory shaft, and from where your outer tie rod is up to here, it's essentially pushing into your spindle. It's not going to want to push to turn. It wouldn't push past. It wanted to turn in, and essentially I was compressing my suspension because it wasn't turning the wheel as opposed to just diving straight into it. So I scuttled that idea and I moved everything back essentially to its original point that came off the Terra jet. Now, I originally didn't think I was going to be able to do this, and that's why it was moved up there. But what I actually done, I took this bushing carrier and seal face carrier, and I took it and I milled it down, and I actually put it inside. And this allowed me to mill off the sides. Don't look at that, that's X-rated. That will be fixed. I milled off the two sides, created a new hole, and I put everything inside. So that keeps it out of harm's way for one, and two, it gives me a little bit more clearance here for steering. Let's talk about why this works, but it doesn't work. Right now we have suspension. It will move up and down freely. What ends up happening is that we have tremendous amount of bump steer, which I knew we were gonna have. I knew we were gonna have bump steer. It's something I've essentially said since I started the front suspension of this thing. So what happens is once the suspension compresses, which we do have a little bit of travel here now, essentially the tie rod becomes taut, pulls in on our steering knuckle, and then we have our tire come in, especially when we're going through the travel. Now, the main reason for this is that our donor UTV was a farm utility vehicle. It wasn't a sport utility, it was straight utility UTV. So it didn't have as much travel as this has right now. It didn't have the control arm angle that this has right now. So what I think I'm going to have to do in the future is steering knuckle or a spindle. I'm essentially going to have to fab up a new steering knuckle for this thing where this upper control arm will actually sit a little bit flatter, because right now at this angle with this length, what ends up happening when the suspension compresses, it's actually shoving out on the tire and out on your steering knuckle, which allows this to get tight because this is not going to let this spindle move, and we're getting a really bad bump steer. So the way we're going to get around that in the future, that's going to be future Mitch's problem, and he's going to be really pissed off, I think. Nah, he won't. Nah, I won't be pissed off, guys, because I do enjoy doing this stuff, and the only way for me to learn is to dive in and do it. I'm going to have to probably shorten this a little bit, come up here with a weird spindle, keep this a little bit more flat. And what that's going to allow is that once we get into suspension travel, it's going to want to haul this tire up like this, where it will follow the curvature. Right now, it wants to push it out before it can start coming up. So that obviously creates a binding issue on our tie rods. That's obviously not going to go anywhere because everything is plenty strong there now. So it's hauling our wheels. So that's where we're at. So in a future video, we will be hauling that apart again. What are you doing down there? You guys never got hit by a snowmobile being carried by a forklift before? Doesn't matter, let me pick you up. You brushed off there. What we have here is a 1995 Yamaha VMAX 2-stroke, twin cylinder, 600cc snowmobile. Now this is going to be the power plant for our Terra jet. So I actually picked this thing up, 300 bucks. I got it home. Another guy actually called me and wanted to buy the skid, and this track off me. So it turns out we got a free motor essentially for our Tearjet build. Now, as you can see, I'm gonna have to get pretty creative with this pipe to get the spacing and whatnot. There were certain criteria that I actually wanted to hit finding and sourcing a power plant for our Tearjet. So one, I wanted it to be liquid cooled because I've heard a little bit of horror stories with air cooled engines, especially sat down low in that tub in the Tearjet. Sometimes the air just doesn't circulate properly and they overheat. So I figured liquid cooled would be cool. We could mount a top mount radiator somewhere and hopefully we can keep this thing cool. Another one, I wanted it of course to be as cheap as possible. So that was pretty cheap. And I wanted electric start. I didn't want to get out and start pulling this thing over. I wanted a nice electric start set up. We've hit the whole checklist on what I wanted. The factory Tearjet comes with around 18 horsepower, 16, 18 horsepower. I believe these came with something like 90-ish horsepower, 95. So it's quite a drastic jump, but it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, I think, perhaps. With that being said, I do realize that this is a little bit too much horsepower for our gearbox perhaps, and I don't expect essentially the Tearjet to be as fast as this thing was on snow. Now this machine actually took a pretty big smack over here, so it's only meant to be a parts machine. The tunnel is essentially ruined, seat's useless, took a good smack to these stupid shock things that Yamaha came out with years ago, but we have a new battery. As you can see, it is going to need a little bit of love, some care. I think I am going to be keeping this because once I take what I want off this thing, it's pretty much getting chucked. But that gearbox is actually a two-way gearbox, forward and reverse. So that may come in handy for another project down the road. But let's start stripping the skidoo. Let's start stripping the skidoo. We have got our engine out, guys. As you can see, this is the little 600. This is our water pump. Now you can kind of see the width, and if you watch the previous videos when I milled out that axle, now you can see that if I have to shove my gearbox over to accommodate this in the tub, that's why I did that. Believe it or not just a pretty face. I do kind of foreshadow some things. Too bad it wasn't louder or something, but yeah. So we are back on this now. The whole thing I want to do now is take all the electrical system. I want to take everything, essentially the light, the gauge, everything got to come off. I will strip this oil tank, I believe, along with this overflow tank. It's something yet to be determined if I'm going to run oil injection. This is your little oil injection pump down here. If you mix it yourself, you know you got oil, as opposed to, you know, grenading that motor. Now, that motor has definitely been outside for quite a while. Either that, maybe it was sunk one part of its life. I have no clue. But you can see the oxidization, a little bit of rust. So we do have to clean that up, but once again, we're in mock-up phase. That can be addressed later. So as you can see, we have our starting motor here that I have to get everything unhooked. This here is our mechanical fuel pump, I believe. I may as well take that as well. But I am going to take this secondary clutch along with that gearbox as well. Now, as I previously stated in the beginning of this video, this is actually sold to another guy. So I'm going to give him essentially whatever he wants. He said he just wants the skid and the track, but you got to take the whole sled. He's not just getting the skid and the track and let me deal with the rest of it. Now it's on the electrical. I want to keep all that intact. Perhaps I'll take my bars off and just fish everything down through. There's a lot of things on this, essentially like heated hand warmers and throttle, but I don't think I'm really going to bother with that. Like, this is a warmer adjustment. You know, you got your high and your low. I'm not going to use that in mine, of course, but I do want to take it all because if you get rid of that before you have yours up and running, you're going to need that for some stupid reason. Let's start ripping that electrical system out. So guys, just a little update there. I figure when you're just watching these videos on time lapse, it could get kind of boring. So as you can see, I took the wiring harness out. This is the main wiring harness. As you can see that everything kind of branches off of here. But what I'm actually going to do now is all these little CDI units, and I'm not even sure what this is. For some reason, this looks like a speaker or a horn or something. When I get that off, I'm going to further inspect that because that's kind of intriguing to me. And I'm actually going to plug it back in, and I'm going to store that in an area probably upstairs in the loft of my shop, and that'll be ready to go, and then I won't kind of wonder where everything's going. Now, there are a couple plugs, of course. One runs back here, as you can see, under the seat, comes along here. And these are hand warmers for back here, I believe. Now, I'm not going to bother with that, and I don't even really care about the tail light. But I do want everything to kind of run. Emergency shutdown, high. So guys, I really want this gearbox. I'm not letting that go with the chassis of this thing. I really want that because this is pretty cool how the output shaft is here. Actually, this would be your input, I should say, because that's where your jack shaft came from, your secondary clutch, and attached here. And then you have output shaft down here that runs your track shaft and that runs cogs. So I think this is a pretty cool little gearbox, and I really want it, but I think I gotta remove this, which it's been rusted in since 1995. And then I gotta take this cover off, and I believe, if I remember correctly, I've never done a VMAX, but I think once I take this cover off, there should be a pin or probably a C-clip holding that output shaft. But I gotta take this cover off to see, and this is kind of jammed on there. So let's see if we can put a little bit of pressure onto it. I nailed it with mouse milk just to see if it'll help a little bit, but I kind of doubt it. So I'm gonna put a bit of pressure, see if we can get this thing to pop. Nice, that was super easy. So I think I have to come in here now, take this case off. Hopefully that will just pop off fairly easily, I'm hoping. It looks like this caliper is all made in the back. So we ended up winning that battle. It was a little bit different than what I thought, but I'm not really sure why there's so much rust on that. But it actually came off pretty easy. So the way they have it is essentially this little shaft, little stub piece, slides on that, and this spline shaft is ran by this gear via this chain, comes in through your input, runs your chain, that's your output, track shaft. Very simple. Very simple, I promise. It does have a forward and reverse built in. So for like a little go-kart or something like that, you could essentially just run a sprocket or a chain or something there, run your drive shaft from here, and you can have your forward and reverse. I know it doesn't seem like a hell of a lot, but for a little tiny compact gearbox, there was no way I was letting that leave with this skid. As of right now, guys, we have everything pretty much taken apart that I want to take apart. I'm gonna come in here, take this gauge and whatnot out of here, take all that out. And this right here is actually the cable that it's ran from a bearing down there. I don't really care about it. I think I'm just gonna cut it off, hack it off, be done with it, haul up my wiring through here, unbolt that, unbolt my light. I'll keep my light bulbs too, just to have in case, you know, I may wanna modify one day. All right, guys, so it's actually the next morning. I was just editing this video to get out to you guys, and I noticed that the camera angle's changed, and I gotta apologize for that. What ends up happening usually is I'll move my stand around to get a still shot or a time-lapse shot for you guys, and for some reason it'll go from landscape to portrait, and it's something that I'm unaware of, and unfortunately I don't usually catch until the editing process. Now that's something I do have to stay on top of. The worst thing with the time lapse is that usually sometimes you could film up to 3 hours and it constrains it down into like 30, 40 seconds, and that's what you guys see, and that's why so much gets done in a time lapse, of course. But you can't put all those parts back on just so you can flip back into landscape and do the whole thing again, or I guess you could, but I don't really want to, to be quite honest with you. So It's something I'm going to try to work on in the future, and I do apologize about the camera angles. So with all that being said, without me rambling at the end of the videos like I usually do, thanks for watching. If you got this far, I really appreciate it. Like, subscribe, share. Once again, this is the tip of the iceberg for our projects. There's a long list coming. So thanks for watching.